Sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones that scare us most. This is a story about Sarah, a woman who traveled west as a mail-order bride in the summer of 1883, expecting little and hoping for less. What she found was a house that frightened away every woman before her, a place of shadows and silence deep in a Montana canyon. But Sarah saw something others missed. This is a story about the courage to stay when everything tells you to run, about finding light in the darkest rooms, and about two broken people who built something beautiful from nothing but books and faith. It's a reminder that sometimes the things that look most frightening hold the greatest treasures. If only we're brave enough to look closer. The wagon jolted over another rut, and Sarah's carpetbag slid across the bench. She caught it, held it in her lap like a child. The driver hadn't spoken in an hour, not since they'd turned off the main trail into this canyon that seemed to swallow the sky whole. Walls of rock rose on both sides now, striped red and gray in the failing light. Pine trees clung to impossible angles. The creek below sounded angry, though she couldn't see it through the brush. Much further. Her voice came out smaller than she meant. The driver spat over the side. Round the next bend. Sarah smoothed her skirt. Brown serge, dusty from 3 days on the stagecoach. She'd tried to brush it clean this morning at the hotel in the settlement town, but the dust had settled into the weave like it meant to stay. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the fabric, 3 others before her. The hotel keeper had mentioned it while Sarah signed the register. Casual, like commenting on weather. "You the 4th bride Wyatt sent for. Other 3 didn't stay past sunset." Sarah hadn't asked why. Didn't want to know. But now, climbing into this canyon with shadows pooling between the rocks, she wondered if she should have. She wondered, too, about the arrangement ahead, whether Mr. Freeman would expect a proper ceremony first. Or if he was one of those men who thought distance from civilization meant distance from decency. The wagon crested a rise, and the driver pulled the horses to a stop. There. Sarah looked. The house sat in a clearing maybe 200 yards ahead, backed against the canyon wall like something cornered. Single story. Plank construction. Steep pitched roof to shed snow. A stone chimney on the north end. No smoke rising from it despite the evening chill. 2 windows. Dark. Porch sagging on one side. A man stood on that porch, motionless as the rocks behind him. "That's Wyatt," the driver said. Unnecessary. Who else would it be? Sarah's throat felt tight. She swallowed. It didn't help. The driver clicked to the horses. They descended the last stretch of trail. And Sarah counted things to keep her breathing steady. 12 fence posts around a kitchen garden. 6 stunted apple trees. 1 woodshed. Door hanging crooked. The clearing couldn't be more than an acre, hemmed in by canyon walls that would block sun for all but a few hours each day. Wyatt still hadn't moved. The wagon stopped. The driver set the brake and climbed down, his boots hitting dirt with a sound that seemed too loud. He reached up for Sarah's bag. She couldn't let go of it. "Ma'am." Sarah forced her fingers open. The driver took the bag and set it on the ground. Then he offered his hand. She took it, grateful for something solid, and stepped down. Her legs wobbled. 3 days of sitting. She steadied herself against the wagon wheel. Wyatt walked toward them. Not hurried, just steady, like a man walking to check a fence line. He was taller than she'd expected from the tin type he'd sent, maybe 6 feet, lean in the way of men who work hard and eat little, dark hair going gray at the temples, denims patched at both knees, collarless shirt the color of old dishwater, sleeves rolled to his elbows, showed forearms corded with muscle and scarred in ways she couldn't read in this light. His face was weathered, lined, 40, maybe older. Hard to tell with men who lived outside. He stopped 3 feet away, met her eyes briefly, then looked at his boots. "Miss Sarah." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Wyatt Freeman. Mr. Freeman. Just Wyatt." The driver cleared his throat. "I'll be heading back before full dark." Wyatt nodded, reached into his pocket and pulled out coins, counted them into the driver's palm with hands that trembled slightly. The driver tipped his hat to Sarah, climbed back onto the wagon, and turned the horses. Within a minute, the sound of wheels faded around the bend, and then there was only the creek and the wind in the pines. Sarah and Wyatt stood in the clearing. The silence pressed on her chest. "You hungry?" Wyatt asked. "No, sir, thank you." "Coffee's on. If you change your mind." He picked up her carpet bag. She expected him to head for the house, but he just stood there, holding it. His hands, she noticed, were shaking, just slightly, same as hers. "The others," Sarah said, hadn't meant to. The words just came. Why didn't they stay? Wyatt's jaw worked. He looked at the house, then back at her. "You'll see soon enough." He walked toward the porch. Sarah followed. Because what else could she do? The stage wouldn't return for a week, and she had $4 to her name. Enough for one night's lodging back in town. Maybe 2, if she didn't eat. The porch steps creaked under Wyatt's weight. He held the door open, and Sarah stepped past him into darkness that smelled of dust and loneliness and years of silence. Her eyes adjusted slowly. 1 room, maybe 20 feet square. A table near the stove. 2 chairs, mismatched. An oil lamp on the table. Not lit. The walls were rough plank, scarred and water-stained in patterns that looked like continents on a poorly drawn map. The floor was clean. She could see that someone had swept recently, but there was nothing on it. No rug. No decoration. The stove was cold, 1 window, curtainless. Let in dying light. Sarah counted furniture because she needed something to count. Table, 2 chairs, the stove, an iron bedstead visible through a doorway to her left, covered with a quilt that looked military in its precision. 4 pieces of furniture in a house that could hold 20. "It ain't much," Wyatt said behind her. Sarah turned. He'd set her bag by the door and stood with his hands hanging at his sides, looking at everything except her. "The well's out back," he said. "Privy past that. I sleep in the side room there. You can have the—" He stopped, swallowed. "There's a room in the back, if you want it. And tomorrow, if you're willin', we can ride to town, see about making things proper, legal-like." The words hung in the air. He was offering marriage, not assumption, not demands, just a question wrapped in courtesy. Sarah's chest loosened slightly. A door stood slightly ajar across the room. She hadn't noticed it at first because it was tucked into shadow, but there was something about the way it hung open, just a few inches, that pulled at her attention. "What's in there?" she asked. Wyatt followed her gaze. His face changed. Not much, just something around his eyes. "Books," he said. Sarah walked toward the door, couldn't help herself. She pushed it open. The last light of day slanted through a west-facing window, and in that golden light Sarah saw books, hundreds of them, floor to ceiling along 3 walls, stacked on the floor, piled on a desk shoved against the 4th wall, leather-bound volumes with spines cracked from use, cloth-covered books faded to colors she couldn't name. Some were water-stained, some had pages coming loose, but they were organized. She could see that immediately, not by size or color, but by some logic known only to the man standing silent behind her. Sarah stepped into the room. Dust motes spun in the sunlight. She reached out and touched the nearest spine. The leather was cool and cracked under her fingertips. "McGuffey's Reader," she whispered. Next to it, Shakespeare, a complete works. The spine read, next to that, Elements of Geometry. She turned slowly, taking it in. Agricultural journals bound in twine, Latin grammar books, a Webster's dictionary so thick it could stop a bullet, volumes of Wordsworth and Milton and Dickens, medical texts, law books, histories. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. Wyatt stood in the doorway. The setting sun caught his face from the side, and she saw something there she hadn't seen before. Not shame, not pride. Hope, maybe, or the memory of it. "Waitin', I suppose," he said. Sarah's hand was still on the dictionary. She opened it. A pressed wildflower columbine. Purple blue fell from between the pages and drifted to the floor. She picked it up, held it in her palm. Behind her, Wyatt's breathing was the only sound. Sarah looked at the books, at the careful way they were shelved, at the dust that said no one had touched them in weeks, maybe months, at the wildflower pressed between words someone had thought worth saving. She thought about the empty rooms in this house, about the 3 women who'd fled before sunset, about the $4 in her pocket, and the stage that wouldn't return for a week. She thought about a man who lived alone in a canyon with nothing but books for company, a man who'd offered marriage before anything else, a man who'd been waiting. "I'll take that coffee now," she said. Wyatt didn't move for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp, and left the doorway. Sarah stood in the room of books as darkness gathered outside. She put the wildflower back in the dictionary, exactly where it had been, and closed the cover gently. Through the open door, she could hear Wyatt working at the stove, the scrape of a match, the smell of sulfur, and then kerosene as he lit the lamp. Light spilled across the floor toward her, pushing back the shadows inch by inch. "Where are you reading this story from tonight? There's something special about sharing these old tales across distances. Reminds me of how stories used to travel by word of mouth across the frontier. Drop a comment and let us know." Sarah woke to the smell of coffee. She lay still, staring at ceiling boards she couldn't see in the dark. Her back ached from the narrow cot. The quilt over her smelled of cedar and camphor. Through the thin wall, she heard nothing, no breathing, no movement. She sat up. The room was small, 8 feet square. She guessed, bare walls, 1 window, curtainless. The first gray light of dawn showed her the unpacked carpet bag at the foot of the cot, and nothing else. The coffee smell pulled her to her feet. She found her wrapper in the bag and pulled it on over her shift. The floor was cold against her bare feet. She opened the door as quietly as she could. The main room was empty. The oil lamp had been extinguished, on the stove. A dented coffee pot sat over coals that glowed faint red. A tin cup waited on the table. Through the window, she saw Wyatt in the clearing. He'd set up a chopping block and was splitting firewood with methodical swings. The axe rose, fell. Wood split with a crack that echoed off the canyon walls. He didn't pause between swings, just reached for another piece. Set it. Swung. Sarah poured coffee into the cup. It was strong enough to strip paint. She added nothing. There was nothing to add, and drank it standing at the window. Wyatt's shoulders were broad under his shirt. Each swing showed the play of muscle down his back. Sweat darkened the fabric between his shoulder blades despite the morning chill. She turned away and found herself looking at the door to the book room. It stood open. An invitation. Maybe. Or just carelessness. Sarah crossed the main room and stepped inside. In daylight, the books seemed even more numerous. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in a whisper that sounded too loud in the silence. Paradise Lost, Common Sense, The Odyssey. Her voice cracked on the last word. She cleared her throat. More books. Elements of Rhetoric, First Principles of Natural Philosophy, The Tempest. She pulled that one from the shelf. The binding cracked when she opened it. Someone had underlined passages in pencil. In the margins, notes in a careful hand, Prospero's isolation self-imposed and knowledge as power or prison. The handwriting was educated, precise, the hand of someone who'd spent years holding a pen. Sarah closed the book, put it back exactly where it had been, behind her. Boots crossed the threshold. "You read," Wyatt said, not a question. Sarah turned. He stood in the doorway, axe in one hand. Sweat ran down his temple. Wood chips clung to his forearms. "Yes, out loud. I didn't think you were—" She stopped. "I'm sorry. Don't be." He leaned the axe against the doorframe. "Ain't heard a voice in this room in 11 years, not counting my own." 11 years. Sarah looked at the books again, at the dust on some, and the careful organization of all. "Why do you have them?" Wyatt wiped his forehead with his sleeve. His eyes moved across the shelves like he was counting something only he could see. "Taught school once," he said. "Boston Latin, before—" He paused. "Brought most of these with me when I left. Kept adding to them from peddlers. Book auctions when estates got sold off." Before what? He didn't say. Sarah waited. The silence stretched. Wyatt shifted his weight. "You hungry?" he asked. "Yes. I'll put on mush." He left. Sarah stood in the book room a moment longer, then followed him out, at the stove. Wyatt measured cornmeal from a burlap sack into a pot of boiling water. His hands were steady, large, scarred across the knuckles. "There's children in the settlement," Sarah said. "I saw them, barefoot, playing in the street while we waited for the stage." Wyatt's shoulders stiffened. He kept stirring. "No school there?" she asked. "No." "Why not?" The spoon scraped against the pot. Once, twice. "Nearest schoolhouse is 20 miles east," Wyatt said. "Town can't afford a teacher." Sarah sat at the table. The chair wobbled under her weight. "You could teach them," she said. Wyatt stopped stirring. He stood completely still, his back to her, one hand gripping the spoon handle. When he finally turned, his face was different. Something in it she hadn't seen before, not quite anger, not quite fear. "You know Wordsworth?" he asked, his voice rough. Sarah blinked at the sudden change. "Some? Recite it." It wasn't a request. Sarah's mouth went dry. The cornmeal mush bubbled on the stove. But Wyatt didn't turn back to it. He just stood there, waiting. She cleared her throat. "I wandered lonely as a cloud," she began. Her voice shook on the first line. "That floats on high o'er vales and hills." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils." The words came easier now. She'd learned this poem at 12, had recited it to her mother while they did washing. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, she stopped. The next verse escaped her. "Continuous as the stars that shine," Wyatt said quietly, "and twinkle on the Milky Way." Their voices met in the middle of the stanza. Speaking the same words at the same moment, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. The mush hissed. Wyatt grabbed the pot off the heat and set it aside. His hands were shaking again. "If you're stayin'," he said, not looking at her, "we should marry, proper like." Sarah's breath caught. "When, tomorrow, ride to town, Keller can witness." Wyatt gripped the edge of the stove. "For appearance, so folks don't talk. So they'll trust us with their children if—" He stopped. "If what?" He turned, met her eyes. "If we start a school, here, use these rooms, these books." Sarah's chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to say it first. "Yes," she said. "To both?" Wyatt nodded once. Then again, like convincing himself, he ladled mush into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. They ate in silence. The mush was plain, just cornmeal and water and a pinch of salt, but it was hot, and Sarah was hungry. When she finished, she set down her spoon. "Those children in town," she said. "Bring them here. Use these books. Use this house." "I already told you. I can't." "Why not?" Wyatt stared at his bowl, at the spoon resting in the last of the mush. "Had trouble. In Boston. Lost the position." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Came west to forget. But I kept the books, kept adding to them. Every time a peddler came through, every time someone sold off a library." He paused. "Didn't know why. Just kept gathering them." Sarah stood. The chair scraped against the floor. She walked to the bookroom doorway and looked at the volumes organized by invisible logic. "You were waiting," she said. Wyatt didn't answer. "For what?" He came to stand beside her, not close, but near enough that she could hear his breathing. "For someone who'd see it," he said. Sarah turned her head, met his eyes. They were brown. She noticed, dark brown with flecks of gold near the iris. "I see it," she said. "Turn 3 of these rooms into classrooms. Start with the youngest children. Teach them to read. Even if we marry tomorrow, folks might still— Then we show them it's respectable." Sarah interrupted. "We do everything proper, by the book, and we just start—" Wyatt stared at her. A muscle worked in his jaw. Then he nodded. 3 rooms. We'd need benches, slates, Chalk. You have slates. He crossed to the desk in the book room and pulled open a drawer. Inside lay a slate board with a wooden frame. The surface was dusty, but in the dust, Sarah could see the ghost of old lessons letters half erased, numbers faint as breath. From Boston, Wyatt said. He blew on the slate. Chalk dust rose in a small cloud. Sarah took it from his hands. The weight was solid. Real, in the wooden groove at the bottom. A stick of white chalk still rested, worn to a nub. "We'll need more," she said. "I'll order them. Next supply wagon comes through in 4 days." Sarah looked at the empty rooms visible beyond the book room, at the space waiting to be filled. Her chest felt tight. "Which books for children?" she asked. Wyatt pulled a primer from the shelf. McGuffey's Eclectic Reader. The spine was cracked, the pages soft from use. "This," he said. "For the youngest." Sarah took it, opened to a page at random. The dog ran. The cat sat. Simple words, clear illustrations. "Too simple," she said. Wyatt's eyebrows rose. "They're 6 years old. Some might be 8 or 10. You want to bore the older ones. You want to lose the younger ones." They stood facing each other across 2 feet of dusty floor. Sarah's pulse beat in her throat. "We use different books," she said. "Group them by ability, not age." Wyatt considered this. He reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder, and pulled down another volume. "This for the middle group." The next hour passed in debate. Sarah insisted on including poetry. Wyatt wanted more arithmetic texts. She argued for stories that would capture imagination. He pushed for practical skills. Their voices rose and fell, overlapping, interrupting. "Our school needs—" Sarah stopped. The words hung in the air between them. Our school. Wyatt had gone still. He stood with a copy of Aesop's Fables in one hand, staring at her. Sarah's face went hot. I know what you meant," Wyatt said. His voice was rough. He set the book down carefully. "You're right. Our school." The sun moved across the window. Shadows shortened, then lengthened again. They cleared the first room of everything except books. Sarah swept, while Wyatt hauled furniture to the woodshed. Dust rose in clouds that made her cough. Her arms ached. The broom handle raised blisters on her palms. Wyatt measured the room with a length of rope, marking where benches would go. His lips moved as he calculated. 8 students per bench, he muttered. 3 benches, need pine boards. Can you build them? Can you sand them smooth? Sarah looked at her hands, already reddened from one morning's work. Yes. When the sun touched the canyon rim, they'd cleared 2 rooms. Sarah's dress was gray with dust. Wyatt's shirt stuck to his back with sweat. He lit the oil lamp on the table. The wick caught, and yellow light pushed against the gathering dark. Then he walked to the book room and brought out a second lamp, lit it, set it in the cleared room. The shadows retreated. The walls looked different in the doubled light, not empty anymore, but waiting. We need to plan, Wyatt said. He brought brown wrapping paper from somewhere and spread it on the table, found a pencil stub, licked the tip, and started sketching. Sarah pulled her chair closer. Their shoulders nearly touched. 3 rooms, Wyatt said, drawing rough rectangles. This one for youngest, 6 to 8 years. This one for middle, Sarah said, pointing. 9 to 12? And this for anyone older. His hand moved across the paper, adding details. Sarah leaned in to see better. Her hair brushed his shoulder. Neither of them moved away. "We'll need copybooks," she said, "for writing practice." Wyatt added it to a list forming in the margin. Chalk, at least 24 sticks. Slates for each student. Can't afford that many. Then they share 2 to a slate. Wyatt's pencil paused. Smart. They worked in silence for a while. The lamp flame flickered. Outside, nightbirds called. Sarah's hand reached for the pencil at the same moment Wyatt went to mark something. Their fingers touched. Both froze. The lamplight caught Wyatt's face from the side. Sarah could see every line around his eyes, every day of 11 years alone in this canyon. He pulled his hand back, cleared his throat. "When do we start?" he asked. "Soon as we're married and the rooms are ready. Day after tomorrow. Then, for the weddin', and the town'll have questions after. Let them ask." Wyatt looked at her. Really looked. Like he was seeing her for the first time. "You ain't like the others?" he said. "No. Why'd you stay?" Sarah thought about the 3 women who'd run, about the empty house and the desperate loneliness that clung to its walls, about books gathered over 11 years by a man who didn't know why. "Because you kept the books," she said simply. Wyatt's throat worked. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at the paper between them. On it, in his careful hand, he'd written, "Our school," not "the school," not "a school." Our outside. Something crashed in the underbrush. Heavy. Close. Wyatt's head snapped up. He stood fast enough to knock his chair backward. Through the window. Sarah saw nothing but darkness and the shapes of trees. Then she heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Wyatt crossed to the door in 3 strides. His hand went to the latch. A voice called from outside. "Wyatt Freeman, male, older, unfamiliar." Wyatt opened the door. Lamplight spilled onto the porch, revealing a man in his 60s with a gray beard and a slouch hat. He held the reins of a mule loaded with supplies. "Name's Keller," the man said. "Got a ranch 10 miles east. Heard you sent for a bride who actually stayed." His eyes found Sarah standing by the table. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." Sarah nodded, her heart still hammering. Keller shifted his weight. "Also heard talk in town. About you maybe startin' a school." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Word travels fast. Stage driver's got a mouth." Keller pulled a burlap sack from the mule's pack. "Brought you this. Pine boards, 2 dozen. Figure you'll need 'em for benches." He set the sack on the porch, inside. Sarah could see the pale ends of cut lumber. "Can't pay you," Wyatt said. "Didn't ask you to." Keller mounted his mule. "My grandson's 8. Can't write his own name. You get that school running. I'll send him." He rode into the darkness before Wyatt could respond. Wyatt stood in the doorway, staring at the lumber. Sarah came to stand beside him. "That's a start," she said. He looked at her, nodded once. Together, they carried the boards inside. The next morning, they rode to the settlement in Wyatt's wagon. The road was rutted from spring rains that had dried to stone-hard ridges. Sarah gripped the bench as the wheels jolted over them. Wyatt sat beside her, reins loose in his hands, not speaking. The settlement was 12 buildings clustered where 2 trails crossed. General store, hotel, saloon, livery. The rest were houses with false fronts to make them look bigger than they were. It took 3 hours by wagon down the canyon trail. Sarah's back ached from the jolting by the time they arrived. Wyatt pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the mercantile. A sign hung crooked above the door, Hutchins Dry Goods and Sundries. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and leather and the metallic tang of new nails. A man behind the counter looked up from a ledger. His eyebrows rose when he saw Sarah. "Well now," he said, "you're still here." "This is Mr. Hutchins," Wyatt said quietly. "Owns the store." Hutchins set down his pencil. "Didn't expect to see you again. Miss, not after—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "What can I do for you folks?" Sarah stepped forward. Her hands were clenched in her skirt. She forced them open. "8 slate boards," she said. "Wooden frames if you have them." Hutchins blinked. 8, 2 dozen sticks of chalk, white. "What are you, copybooks?" Sarah continued. "Palmer method if you stock them. A dozen to start." Hutchins looked from Sarah to Wyatt, who stood near the door with his hat in his hands. Understanding dawned on the storekeeper's face. "You're really doing this fool thing," Hutchins said. Wyatt's shoulders hunched. He stared at the floor. "Yes," Sarah said. Her voice didn't shake. "We are." Hutchins sucked his teeth. He walked to a shelf and started pulling down slate boards, set them on the counter one by one. The wooden frames clacked together. "Chalk's in the back," he muttered. "Copybooks, too." While he gathered the supplies, Sarah examined fabric bolts stacked against the wall. Her fingers found flour-sacking rough weave. Undyed, with Rocky Mountain Mill stamped in blue ink across the fold. "I'll take 6 yards of this, too," she called. "What for?" "Curtains," Hutchins snorted, but measured out the fabric and added it to the pile on the counter. He tallied numbers in his ledger, his pencil scratching. "Comes to $14.60, he said. Wyatt stepped forward. He pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and counted out coins. Sarah watched his hands shake as he placed each one on the counter. $10, 11, 12. He stopped, looked in the pouch, looked at Sarah. "I got 8 more, he said quietly. "Total." Hutchins drummed his fingers on the counter. Sarah opened her own purse. Inside were the $4 she'd arrived with. Untouched. She added them to Wyatt's pile. "That's 16, she said. "Can we settle the rest next month?" Hutchins studied them both. Wyatt's patched denims. Sarah's plain dress with the hem she'd let down twice already. The desperate hope in their faces. "Fine," he said finally. "But you pay the balance by August, or I take the goods back." "We will," Sarah said. They loaded the supplies into the wagon. Sarah held the slate boards in her lap to keep them from rattling. Wyatt drove them back up the canyon without speaking. His jaw was set, and a muscle jumped in his cheek. At the house, they unloaded everything into the cleared room that would become the first classroom. Sarah stacked the slate boards against the wall, while Wyatt carried the lumber from Keller's donation inside. "I'll start measuring," Wyatt said. He pulled a folding carpenter's square from his back pocket and a pencil from behind his ear. The square was old, but well maintained. The brass fittings polished from use. Sarah watched him work. He measured twice before marking any cut, his lips moving silently as he calculated. The pencil line on the pine was straight as a rifle shot. "Hand me that saw," he said. She found it leaning against the wall, a crosscut saw with a wooden handle worn smooth. She carried it to him. Their fingers brushed when she passed it over. Wyatt knelt and began cutting. The saw teeth bit into the wood with a sound like tearing fabric. Sawdust fell in pale curls at his feet. "You know carpentry?" Sarah asked. "Enough!" The saw hit a knot. Wyatt adjusted his angle and pushed through it. "My father was a shipwright. Taught me before I went east for school." "In Boston?" Wyatt nodded, not looking up. The board fell free. He measured another, marked it, cut again. By noon, he had enough pieces for the first bench. Sarah watched him drill holes for the nails, slow work with a hand auger that squealed with each turn. "I could help," she said. "You know how to drive a nail." "No." Wyatt stood, wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Then I'll teach you." He showed her how to hold the hammer, how to tap the nail first to set it, then drive it home with firm strikes. Sarah's first attempt bent the nail sideways. The second split the wood. The third went in crooked. "Again," Wyatt said. She tried a fourth nail. This one went straight. The head sank flush with the wood. "Good," Wyatt said. Something almost like a smile crossed his face. They worked through the afternoon. Wyatt cut, Sarah nailed. The rhythm of it settled into her bones, the rasp of the saw, the ring of the hammer, the creak of wood fitting together. Her hands blistered. She kept working. Splinters worked under her nails. She kept working. By evening, they had one bench assembled. It was rough, the joints weren't perfect. The surface needed sanding, but it was solid. Wyatt tested it with his weight. The bench held. "Tomorrow we sand it," he said. "Make it smooth so it don't tear up their clothes." Sarah looked at her palms. They were red and raw. A splinter the size of a pine needle stuck out from the meat of her right hand near the thumb. She tried to pull it out. The end broke off beneath the skin. "Let me," Wyatt said. He took her hand in both of his. His fingers were calloused and gentle. He bent close, examining the splinter. "Hold still," he murmured. He pulled a pocket knife from his denims and opened the smallest blade. Sarah's breath caught. The blade touched her palm. Pressing careful, the splinter came free in one piece. Blood welled up not much, just a few bright drops. Wyatt pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. Clean, carefully folded. He wrapped it around her palm and held it there, applying pressure. Neither of them moved. Sarah could feel his pulse through his fingertips, fast, matching hers. "Thank you," she whispered. Wyatt's thumb traced the edge of the bandage. Once. Gentle. "Can't have you bleedin' on the pine," he said, but his voice was rough, and he didn't let go. Outside. The sun touched the canyon rim. Inside. The room smelled of fresh-cut wood and linseed oil, and the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. Wyatt released her hand slowly, stepped back. "We should eat," he said. But when Sarah looked at the incomplete bench, at the pile of lumber still waiting, at the slate boards stacked against the wall, she saw something else. She saw 8 children sitting, learning, reading. She saw a future taking shape from sawdust and splinters and two people who'd been strangers a week ago. "Tomorrow we finish it," she said. Wyatt nodded. He gathered his tools while Sarah lit the lamp. Neither noticed the rider watching from the canyon rim above, or the way he turned his horse and disappeared into the gathering dark. The morning was gray and cold when the first child arrived. Sarah heard the footsteps on the porch before she saw her light, hesitant steps that paused at the door. She looked up from the primer she'd been arranging on the new bench and saw a small face peering through the window. A girl, 6, maybe 7 years old. Blonde hair pulled into braids that had already started to come loose. Bare feet despite the chill. A faded calico dress that hung past her knees. Hand-me-down from someone bigger. Sarah set down the book and went to the door. Her palms were bandaged, stiff from yesterday's work with hammer and nails. But she gripped the latch anyway. The girl stepped back when the door opened. "Good morning," Sarah said. The girl twisted her hands in her skirt. Behind her, a woman stood at the edge of the clearing, thin, worn, with work-reddened hands and exhaustion carved into every line of her face. A washerwoman, Sarah guessed, from the smell of lye soap that clung to both of them. "I'm Mrs. Hoffman," the woman called. Her voice was rough. "This is Emma. Heard you might teach her to read." "We will," Sarah said. She knelt so her eyes were level with Emma's. "Would you like that to learn your letters?" Emma nodded. Didn't speak. "Come in, then." Emma looked back at her mother, who made a small shooing motion. The girl climbed the porch steps slowly, gripping the rail. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Wyatt standing in the back of the room, arranging books on a shelf. Wyatt turned. He saw the child and went completely still. "This is Mr. Freeman," Sarah said gently. "He'll be your teacher, too." She paused. "My husband." They'd married 2 days ago. Quick ceremony at Keller's ranch with Keller and his wife as witnesses. No celebration, just vows and signatures and a ride back to the canyon in silence. Sarah wore a ring, now plain gold, sized too large, that Wyatt had bought from a peddler years ago for reasons he couldn't explain. It slid loose on her finger. Wyatt crossed the room. His boots made no sound on the swept floor. When he reached Emma, he knelt just as Sarah had, bringing himself down to the child's height. "Hello, Emma," he said. His voice was soft. "You scared?" Emma nodded again. "That's all right. Learning new things is scary." Wyatt held out his hand, palm up. "But we'll go slow. I promise." Emma looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she placed her small fingers in his palm. Wyatt's jaw worked. He stood carefully, still holding her hand, and led her to the bench they'd sanded smooth 2 days ago. "This is your seat," he said. "Right here by the window so you can see." Emma sat. Her feet didn't touch the floor. She gripped the edge of the bench with both hands. Mrs. Hoffman lingered in the doorway. "I got to get to work. Can she stay till noon?" "She can stay as long as she needs to," Sarah said. The woman nodded, turned to leave, turned back. "Thank you," she said. The words came out cracked. "Ain't never been able to afford—" She stopped, swallowed. "Thank you." She left before Sarah could respond. Sarah closed the door and turned to find Wyatt already at the chalkboard he'd mounted on the wall. He picked up a piece of white chalk and drew a large letter A. "This is where we start," he said. By mid-morning, 2 more children had arrived. Brothers 8 and 10 years old. Sarah guessed with their father's long jaw and their mother's dark eyes. They carried battered tin lunch pails and wore denims patched at the knees. "I'm Thomas," the older one said. "This is William." William hung back, thumb in his mouth. Wyatt brought them to the bench beside Emma's. "You know your letters?" Thomas shook his head. "Numbers. Some. Pa taught us countin' for the cattle." "Good," Wyatt said. "We'll start there." Sarah watched him work with the 3 children. He moved between them with a patience she hadn't seen in him before kneeling beside Emma to guide her hand forming the letter B, standing behind the boys to check their slate work, never raising his voice above a murmur. At noon, the parents returned. Thomas and William's mother brought a jar wrapped in cloth. "Choke cherry jam," she said, pressing it into Sarah's hands. "From last summer. It ain't much, but it's perfect," Sarah said. "Thank you." Mrs. Hoffman came for Emma just after. The girl had learned 5 letters. She recited them for her mother on the porch. A, B, C, D, E. Mrs. Hoffman's eyes filled. She gripped Emma's hand and led her away without speaking. Wyatt stood in the doorway, watching them go. His shoulders were tight. "You did well," Sarah said. He shook his head. "She's so small and scared. She'll come back tomorrow." "How do you know?" Sarah looked at him, at the chalk dust on his hands, and the careful way he'd organized the primers by difficulty, at the man who'd spent 11 years alone in a canyon with books he didn't know he was saving for this. "Because you showed her kindness," she said. The next morning, Emma returned with a girl her own age, another blonde child with the same bare feet and faded dress. By the end of the week, 6 children sat on the benches. Sarah taught in the mornings. She started with the alphabet song, her voice lifting in the melody her own mother had taught her. The children's voices joined hers, tentative at first, then stronger. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The sound filled the house. Wyatt stood in the doorway to the book room, listening. Sarah saw him wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. In the afternoons, Wyatt took over. He taught them numbers using stones from the creek. He taught them to write their names on the slate boards, guiding small hands that had never held a writing implement before. His hands still trembled sometimes when he reached for the chalk, but his voice stayed steady. But what captivated them most were his stories. "There was a man named Odysseus," Wyatt said one afternoon, sitting on the edge of the desk with the children gathered at his feet. "He spent 10 years trying to get home, 10 years fighting storms and his own mistakes." Thomas leaned forward. "What kind of storms?" "The kind that live inside you," Wyatt said. "Fear, pride, the voice that tells you to give up." He told them about the long journey without mentioning violence, about sirens and their songs, about Penelope waiting. He turned an epic into a story about perseverance, about the long road home. The children sat motionless, barely breathing. When he finished, William asked, "Did he make it? Did he get home?" Wyatt nodded. He did, because he never stopped trying. That evening, Sarah and Wyatt sat on the porch as the sun set. The creek murmured below. Nighthawks swooped through the gathering dusk. "It's working," Sarah said quietly. Wyatt said nothing. He stared at the canyon walls turning purple in the fading light. "Did you hear me?" she asked. "I heard." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I just keep waiting for it to fall apart." "Why would it?" "Because everything I touch does." Sarah turned to look at him. His profile was sharp against the sky, the line of his jaw, the gray at his temples, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. "What happened in Boston?" she asked. Wyatt was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had a student, 12 years old, brilliant, could recite Homer in Greek." He paused. His father was a judge, powerful. He wanted his son trained for law, not literature. When the boy kept choosing books over ledgers, the father blamed me, said I was filling his head with useless things. Sarah waited. "The boy ran away," Wyatt continued. "Tried to join a ship heading south. His father found him, brought him home, blamed me for everything. Had me dismissed, blacklisted." He looked at his hands. "I never saw the boy again, don't know what happened to him. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it I encouraged him, told him books could save him. That knowledge was power." Wyatt's voice cracked. "What good is knowledge if it gets you beaten by your own father?" Sarah reached over and took his hand. He flinched, but didn't pull away. The too large ring on her finger caught the last light. "You gave him something to hope for," she said. "That matters." "Does it?" Before Sarah could answer, footsteps sounded on the trail. They both turned. A man emerged from the trees, tall, well-dressed in a suit too fine for the frontier. Behind him, another man in similar clothes, both riding horses that gleamed in the last light. The lead man dismounted. He was perhaps 50, with silver hair and a gold watch chain across his vest. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Freeman," he said, "my name is Dalton. I represent the Rocky Mountain Railroad Company. I wonder if we might have a word about your property." Wyatt stood slowly. Sarah felt his hand tighten on hers before he let go. "What about it?" Wyatt asked. Dalton pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "We're surveying a route through this canyon. Your land sits directly in our path." He held out the paper. "We'd like to make you an offer. $200. Very generous, considering—" Sarah's stomach dropped. She looked at Wyatt's face and saw it go pale. "Considering what?" Wyatt asked. Dalton's smile widened. "Considering you don't actually own this land, Mr. Freeman, no filed claim, no deed, just a squatter making improvements on public property." He gestured at the house. "Noble improvements, I'll grant you, but legally meaningless." The paper hung in the air between them. Behind Dalton, his companion watched with hard eyes. In the house, Sarah could see the slate boards stacked against the wall, the primers arranged on the shelf, the benches they'd built with blistered hands. She thought of Emma learning her letters, of Thomas asking about Odysseus, of 6 children who'd finally found a place to learn. Wyatt reached for the paper with shaking hands. Wyatt unfolded the document. The paper crackled in the silence. Sarah moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Legal language filled the page, dense blocks of text about railroad easements and property acquisition and compensation schedules. At the bottom, a red wax seal the size of a silver dollar. Above it, a space for a signature. $200 is more than fair, Dalton said, given the condition of the structures. Wyatt's eyes moved across the lines. His lips didn't move. He read fast. Sarah noticed, like a man trained to parse complicated text. It says here you need possession by September 1st. Wyatt said. Correct. Survey work begins in October. That's 4 months? Plenty of time to relocate. Dalton's companion shifted his weight. The leather of his saddle creaked. We can even assist with finding suitable property elsewhere. Sarah looked at the man speaking. He was younger than Dalton, maybe 35, with a clean-shaven face and eyes that reminded her of a hawk watching for movement in the grass. And if I decline? Wyatt asked. Dalton's smile didn't change. Then we'll be forced to pursue other legal remedies. As I mentioned, you're on public land. Squatters' rights are limited. Improvements mean nothing without a filed claim. Wyatt folded the paper. His hands were steady now. He held it out to Dalton. No, he said. The word hung in the air. Dalton didn't take the paper. I beg your pardon. I said no. I ain't selling. Mr. Freeman, I don't think you understand. I understand fine. Wyatt's voice stayed level. Quiet. You want my land. I ain't giving it to you. The younger man dismounted. He was taller than Sarah had thought, well over 6 feet. He walked to the porch steps, but didn't climb them. Perhaps you need time to consider, he said. Discuss it with your wife. Wyatt's jaw tightened. There's nothing to discuss. Dalton took the paper from Wyatt's hand, refolded it with precise movements. You're making a mistake. This land is worthless without a railroad connection. We're offering you a chance to profit from inevitable progress. Progress for who? For everyone. Jobs, commerce, civilization. Wyatt gestured at the house behind him, at the slate boards visible through the window. We got civilization. We're teaching children to read. Dalton followed his gesture. Saw the benches, the primers on the shelves. His expression shifted, something like amusement crossing his face. A school, he said. How noble and utterly impractical. Impractical how you can't sustain this. You have no funding, no official sanction, no legal claim to the property. Dalton slipped the paper back into his coat. Come September, when we exercise our rights to this land, everything you've built will be dismantled. Those children will be back where they started. And you'll have nothing. Sarah's hands clenched in her skirt. She stepped forward, putting herself beside Wyatt. You don't know that, she said. Dalton looked at her for the first time. Really looked. His eyes traveled from her dusty hem to her face, taking in every detail. And you are, he asked, Sarah Freeman. Mrs. Freeman. Dalton's tone suggested he saw more than she'd said. You came here as what a mail-order arrangement heat climbed Sarah's neck. We're married proper, legal. I see. Dalton paused. Well, Mrs. Freeman, you seem like a sensible woman. Surely you understand the futility of fighting economic development. The railroad brings prosperity. Your school, charming as it is, serves 6 children. We're talking about jobs for hundreds. Opportunity for an entire region. 6 children who couldn't read 2 weeks ago, Sarah said. 6 families who trust us. That ain't nothin'. It's admirable, but misguided. Dalton mounted his horse. The offer stands until the end of July. After that, we proceed through legal channels. I suggest you reconsider. Wyatt moved, 1 step forward. His shoulder came between Dalton and Sarah. You'll speak respectful, or you'll leave, Wyatt said. His voice was still quiet, but something in it made the younger man's hand move toward his coat. Easy, Dalton said to his companion, then to Wyatt. We meant no disrespect. simply stating facts. You have no claim. We have legal authority to survey this land and acquire it through proper channels. Fighting us will only delay the inevitable and cost you the generous offer we're making now." "Then I guess we'll delay it," Wyatt said. Dalton studied him. The silence stretched. A nighthawk called from somewhere up canyon. "Very well," Dalton said finally. "But understand, difficulties tend to arise for those who resist progress. Property disputes can be complicated, expensive, and public sentiment often favors economic development over individual stubbornness. That a threat, simply an observation." Dalton gathered his reins. "Good evening. Mr. Freeman? Mrs. Freeman? I expect we'll speak again soon." The two men rode down the trail. Sarah and Wyatt stood watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the creek noise. Then Wyatt's knees buckled. He sat down hard on the porch steps. His hands were shaking again, worse than before. He gripped his thighs to steady them. Sarah sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "He's right," Wyatt said. "I got no claim, no deed, nothing legal. Why not? You been here 11 years? 12 come October." Wyatt stared at his hands. "Never filed because I was afraid they'd find me. The school board in Boston, they might have put out inquiries. If I filed a homestead claim, my name goes in public records. Someone might see it, connect it to the scandal. That was 12 years ago. Don't matter. Some things follow you." He looked at the house, at the lamplight glowing through the windows where children had sat learning their letters just hours ago. "And now I got to tell those families we might lose everything by September. We don't know that yet. You heard him? No claim means no rights." Sarah stood, brushed dust from her skirt. "Then we get a claim. File proper. Tomorrow." "Sarah, you got 12 years of improvements. That counts for something under homestead law." "How do you know homestead law?" "I read." She held out her hand. "Come on, let's look at them books of yours. The legal ones. There's got to be something in there about squatters' rights and land claims." Wyatt took her hand, let her pull him to his feet. They went inside. The oil lamp still burned on the table. Sarah lit 2 more, one from the book room, one from her bedroom. She set them around the main room until shadows retreated to the corners. Wyatt pulled law books from the shelves. Heavy volumes bound in cracked leather with gold lettering gone dim. He stacked them on the table while Sarah cleared space. They sat across from each other and started reading. The legal language was dense. Sarah's eyes burned after the first hour. Wyatt read faster, his finger tracking lines, occasionally making notes on a scrap of paper. "Here," he said suddenly. He turned a book toward her and pointed to a section. "Homestead Act of 1862. Says you can claim up to 160 acres of public land if you improve it and live on it for 5 years. You've been here 12, but I never filed the initial claim. Don't know if I can file retroactive." He kept reading. His finger stopped on another passage. "Wait. There's a clause about educational improvements. Schools built on public land can be claimed under special provision if they serve the community." Sarah leaned closer. The lamplight caught the words on the page. "Public interest in the advancement of literacy and education shall be considered a valuable improvement equivalent to agricultural development." "That's us," she said. "We're serving the community. 6 children already and more coming." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "But we ain't official. No charter from the territory, no certification, just 2 people teaching in a house." "So we get official?" "How?" Sarah thought. Her mind raced through possibilities. "We go to the land office, file the claim tomorrow, cite the educational clause, present evidence attendance records, witness statements from the families. We don't have attendance records. Then we start keeping them tonight. Sarah stood, found paper and pencil, started writing names from memory. Emma Hoffman, Thomas Henderson, William Henderson. Wyatt watched her write. Even if we file, Dalton's lawyers will fight it. Railroads got money, power. We got nothing. Sarah set down the pencil. He looked at him across the table. The lamplight threw shadows under his eyes, made him look older than his 39 years. We got 6 children who couldn't read 2 weeks ago, she said. We got families trusting us with their only chance at education. We got this house and these books and... She stopped. Her throat tightened. We got each other. That ain't nothing. Wyatt's throat worked. He looked down at the law book, at the words about educational improvements and public interest. What if we lose? He asked quietly. What if we don't? He met her eyes, held them. Something passed between them, not quite agreement, not quite hope, but something close enough to keep going. All right, he said. We file tomorrow. Sarah nodded, started to turn back to the list of names. Then hoofbeats sounded outside, fast, coming up the trail in the dark. Both of them froze. The rider didn't slow at the clearing, came straight to the house. Boots hit the ground. Fist pounded on the door. Freeman, a man's voice, rough, urgent. Open up! Wyatt crossed to the door, opened it. Keller stood on the porch, breathing hard. His mule was lathered with sweat. Behind him, the canyon was full dark. What's wrong? Wyatt asked. Keller looked from Wyatt to Sarah, back to Wyatt. Town meetin' tomorrow night, he said. At the church, railroads pushin' for right-of-way through the canyon. They're asking the settlement to support it. Jobs, they're sayin'. Economic development. He paused. They mentioned your school. Said it's an obstacle to progress. Sarah's stomach dropped. Who all's comin' to this meeting? Wyatt asked. Everyone? Merchants? Ranchers? Every family with a stake? Keller gripped the porch rail. Freeman, you got to be there. You got to speak for the school. Because if the town sides with the railroad, you ain't got a chance in creation of keepin' this place. The next morning, only 4 children came. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching the trail, waiting for Emma and the Henderson boys. The sun climbed higher. The clearing filled with light. No one else arrived. Thomas and William sat on the front bench with a girl Sarah hadn't seen before, maybe 9 years old, with dark hair and a dress too small for her growing frame. Her name was Rachel. She'd walked 3 miles alone, she said. Her pa was dead, and her ma worked at the hotel. The 4th child was a boy of 7 with red hair and freckles across his nose. He gave his name as Peter and nothing else. 4 children in a room built for 20. Sarah taught them the alphabet song. Their voices sounded thin in the empty space. She kept glancing at the door. At noon, Wyatt came in from chopping wood. His shirt was soaked through with sweat despite the morning chill. He looked at the 4 children, at the empty benches. Where's the others? He asked quietly. Haven't come. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He washed his hands in the basin and took over the afternoon lesson. He taught them about fractions using pieces of kindling, cut them into halves and quarters, let the children hold the wood and count. But his voice was flat. His hands shook when he drew on the slate board. At 3 o'clock, Mrs. Hoffman appeared in the doorway. She stood twisting her apron in her hands. Her eyes were red. Sarah stepped outside, closed the door behind her so the children wouldn't hear. "I can't send Emma no more," Mrs. Hoffman said. The words came out in a rush. "I'm sorry, I wanted to, but I heard talk in town and I—" She stopped, swallowed. "I work at the hotel. Mr. Hutchins owns it. He says if the railroad don't come through, the settlement dies. Says anyone who fights it is fighting jobs and progress. And—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose my position. It's all I got. Emma and me. We'd starve without it." Sarah's throat closed. She nodded because she couldn't speak. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Hoffman said again. She backed away, nearly ran down the trail. Sarah stood alone on the porch. Inside, she could hear Wyatt's voice continuing the lesson. Steady, patient, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That evening, 2 more families came. The Hendersons and Peter's mother, a tired woman with flour dust in her hair, who worked at the bakery. They all said the same things. They were sorry. They believed in the school, but they couldn't risk their livelihoods, not when the whole town was talking about the railroad and jobs and the fool squatter in the canyon who thought books mattered more than progress. Wyatt listened to each of them, thanked them for coming, told them he understood. When the last one left, he went to the table and sat down hard. His hands lay flat on the wood. He stared at them like they belonged to someone else. Sarah lit the lamp. The wick caught, and yellow light spread across Wyatt's face. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "We still go into the meeting?" she asked. Wyatt didn't answer. "Wyatt, what's the point?" His voice was barely audible. "They already decided. The railroad brings money. We bring nothing. We bring education. To 4 children." He looked up at her. 4, Sarah. Out of how many in that settlement, 2030? We ain't saving anyone. We're just—" He stopped, shook his head. Sarah's hands clenched. "You giving up? I'm being realistic. You're being—" She caught herself, took a breath. "You ran from Boston when things got hard. You hid in this canyon for 12 years, and now you want to run again." Wyatt stood. The chair scraped backward. "You don't know nothing about what happened in Boston." "Then tell me the whole truth." "I already did. You told me a story, not what really broke you." Sarah moved closer. "What really happened? Why'd you run?" Wyatt's hands were shaking. He gripped the table edge. "The boy didn't just run away, he tried to—" His voice cracked. "Jumped off a bridge into the Charles River in January. Someone pulled him out before he drowned. But—" He stopped, swallowed hard. He never spoke again. Just sits in his father's house, staring at nothing, ruined. And it was my fault because I told him books could save him when all they did was make his cage smaller." The lamp flame flickered. Outside, the creek murmured in the dark. Sarah's voice came out quieter than she meant. "That ain't on you." "Yes, it is." Wyatt's knuckles were white. "I filled his head with ideas he couldn't use, gave him hope that made everything worse, and now I'm doing the same thing to these children, teaching them to read when they'll spend their lives washing clothes and breaking rocks and—" "Stop!" Sarah grabbed his arm, hard enough to hurt. "Don't you dare make them carry your shame." Wyatt flinched like she'd struck him. "We're going to that meeting," Sarah said. Her fingers dug into his sleeve. "And you're going to speak. Or I'll do it myself and tell everyone you're too ashamed to show your face." She let go, walked to the door, grabbed her shawl from the hook. Wyatt followed. They took the wagon in silence. The trail to town was dark, lit only by a sliver of moon. 3 hours down the canyon in the jolting wagon, Sarah sat rigid on the bench. Arms crossed, Wyatt drove with the reins loose in his hands. The settlement appeared around a bend, 12 buildings with lamplight in the windows. Horses and wagons clustered around the church at the center. Voices carried on the night air. Wyatt pulled the wagon to a stop, sat without moving. "I can't," he whispered. Sarah climbed down, walked to his side of the wagon, looked up at him in the darkness. "Yes, you can," she said. "Because 4 children are counting on you. And tomorrow, maybe it'll be 6 again, or 8, but only if you fight for it." She held out her hand. Wyatt stared at it. Then he took it and climbed down. They walked to the church together. The basement was packed, maybe 40 people on wooden benches facing a makeshift platform at the front. Kerosene lamps hung from hooks in the ceiling, throwing shadows that danced on the whitewashed walls. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and tobacco and nervousness. Every head turned when Sarah and Wyatt entered. Dalton stood on the platform with 3 other men Sarah didn't recognize. All wore city suits. All looked comfortable with being watched. "Ah, Mr. Freeman," Dalton said. "Mrs. Freeman, please join us. This concerns you directly." Sarah felt the weight of 40 pairs of eyes. She followed Wyatt down the center aisle to an empty bench near the back. Her legs felt weak. She sat before they could give out. Hutchins stood at the front, acting as moderator. He banged a gavel on a small table. "Let's get started," he said. "We all know why we're here. Rocky Mountain Railroad wants to run a spur through the canyon. They're offering jobs, regular freight service, connection to the eastern markets." He paused. "But there's complications. Specifically, Mr. Freeman's property sits in the proposed route." Dalton stepped forward. "Gentlemen, ladies, the railroad represents progress. Within 5 years, this settlement could be a proper town, a depot, regular commerce. Your children could have real opportunities instead of scratching in the dirt." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But we can't move forward while squatters block essential routes." Dalton continued. "Mr. Freeman has been offered generous compensation, $200 for canyon land, yet he refuses. Why? Because he started some kind of school. 4 children. Last count. 4 children standing between this entire community and prosperity." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to stand, wanted to speak, but her voice was trapped in her throat. "Now I ask you," Dalton said, spreading his hands, "is that fair? Should 4 children's education unsanctioned, unofficial, taught by a man with no credentials, take precedence over jobs for dozens, opportunity for hundreds?" A merchant Sarah didn't know stood up. "He's right. We need that railroad. My business is dying. Can't get goods in. Can't ship products out. If the railroad comes, I can expand, hire workers." Another man stood. "Same here. I got 3 sons who need work. Railroad means jobs." Keller rose from a bench near the front. "And what about my grandson? He's learning to write his name. First person in our family who can—" "You telling me that don't matter?" "It matters," the merchant said. "But one boy's letters don't outweigh 20 men's wages." Voices erupted, people talking over each other. Hutchins banged his gavel, but the noise continued. Sarah felt Wyatt beside her. He was completely still, staring at his boots, his shoulders hunched like a man taking blows. The voices got louder, angrier. Someone shouted that Freeman was selfish. Someone else called him a fool. A woman yelled that her family needed the work, needed the money, needed the railroad more than anyone needed books. Wyatt's breathing came faster, shallow. His hands gripped his knees. Sarah looked at his face, saw the shame there. The old wound from Boston splitting open in front of 40 strangers. He was drowning again, right here in this church basement, drowning in voices telling him he was wrong. He was worthless. His books meant nothing. She stood. The voices didn't quiet immediately. She just stood there while the argument raged around her. Then Keller saw her. "Let the woman speak," he said, loud enough to cut through the noise. The room fell silent. Dalton smiled. "Mrs. Freeman, you have something to contribute." Sarah turned to face the room. 40 faces stared back, some hostile, some curious, some like Mrs. Hoffman in the third row ashamed. Her hands shook. She clasped them behind her back where no one could see. Hutchins cleared his throat. "Let us pray before we continue." He bowed his head. "Lord, we ask for your wisdom in this matter. Guide us to what's right. Amen." A scattered amen echoed through the room. Sarah waited until it was quiet again. Then she spoke. "Railroad brings money for 10 years, she said. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. Tried again. "Maybe 20. Then the silver runs out or the route changes or the company finds cheaper options. And you're left with nothing but empty buildings and broken promises." Someone scoffed. Sarah kept going. "But a child who can read, that lasts a lifetime. That child can build something that stays." "Pretty words," the merchant said. "But they don't feed families. Neither does a railroad that pulls out when the profit dies." Sarah shot back. "How many boomtowns you seen go bust? How many places get promised prosperity and end up with dust?" Silence. "Freeman's school ain't perfect," Sarah continued. "It ain't official. But in 2 weeks, 6 children learned their letters. 6 children who had nothing before. And 4 of them are still coming, even after their parents got—" She looked directly at Dalton, told about difficulties for those who resist. Dalton's smile didn't waver. "No one's been threatened, Mrs. Freeman, simply informed of reality." Hutchins banged the gavel. "All right, we'll put it to a vote." "Wait," Dalton interrupted. "I'd like to propose a compromise. Freeman keeps his school. We route around it. Adds cost, but we're committed to community harmony." He smiled. "Provided, of course, that Mr. Freeman files a proper homestead claim, establishes legal ownership, because we can't route around public land occupied by squatters. Surely that's reasonable." The room murmured agreement. Sarah's stomach sank. Hutchins nodded. "That seems fair. Freeman, you willing to file legal claim?" Wyatt stood slowly. His voice was hoarse. I can try, but I don't know if—" "Then we'll table the vote," Hutchins said. "Give Freeman 2 weeks to get his affairs in order. File the claim. Get proper documentation. Then we reconvene." The gavel banged. The meeting ended. People filed out. Some avoided Wyatt's eyes. Others nodded at Sarah. Mrs. Hoffman stopped, opened her mouth, closed it, and hurried past. When the room emptied, only Sarah and Wyatt remained. And Dalton, waiting by the door with his arms crossed. 2 weeks, Mr. Freeman," he said pleasantly. "Should be plenty of time, assuming, of course, that you can actually file a legal claim. No outstanding issues, no reason the land office might reject you." He tipped his hat. Good evening." He left. Sarah and Wyatt sat in the empty basement surrounded by the smell of extinguished lamps. "I can't file," Wyatt whispered. "If I go to the land office, if I put my name on official documents, someone might connect me to Boston, to the scandal, to—" He stopped, put his head in his hands. "I brought you into this. I'm sorry." Sarah's throat was tight. She reached for his shoulder. "You didn't bring me," she said. "I came, and I'm still here." They sat in silence. Through the small basement window, Sarah could see stars appearing in the dark sky. "What do we do?" Wyatt asked, before Sarah could answer. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Both of them looked up. The sheriff appeared a solid man in his 50s with gray in his mustache and a tin star on his vest. Behind him, Dalton's younger companion from before. "Freeman," the sheriff said. His voice was tired. "Got a question for you. Your real name Wyatt Freeman, or is it something else?" Wyatt's face went white. Sarah saw the color drain from his cheeks like water from a broken cup. "It's Freeman," he said. His voice was barely audible. The sheriff descended the stairs. His boots made hollow sounds on the wood. Dalton's companion followed, staying near the door. "That your birth name?" the sheriff asked. Wyatt's hands gripped the bench. "No. What was it before?" The silence stretched. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Whitman," Wyatt said finally. "Wyatt Whitman." The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, unfolded it slowly. "Got a telegram from Boston? Inquiry about a Wyatt Whitman, former teacher, left the city under suspicious circumstances 12 years back." He looked at Wyatt. "That you—" Wyatt nodded. "They want to know your whereabouts." "Who's they?" "School board. Says here there's questions about your conduct with students. Says you left before an investigation could conclude." The sheriff's face was unreadable. "Says there might be charges." Sarah stood. "That's a lie." The sheriff looked at her. "You know this how—" "He told me what happened. A student tried to—" She stopped, looked at Wyatt. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "He didn't do nothing wrong. The boy's father was the one who— I don't need the story from you, miss." The sheriff turned back to Wyatt. "This true you run from an investigation?" Wyatt's throat worked. He nodded again. "Then I got to ask you to come with me. Hold you till we get clarification from Boston." "No," Sarah said. The sheriff's hand moved to the pistol on his hip. Not drawing, just resting there. "This ain't a request, ma'am. You got a warrant?" Sarah asked. "Don't need one for questioning." "Actually, you do." The voice came from the stairs. Everyone turned. Keller stood there with a leather-bound book in his hands. Behind him, 3 more men Sarah recognized from the meeting ranchers. By their clothes— "What are you doing here?" "Keller?" the sheriff asked. Keller descended the stairs and set the book on the bench. "Heard the question you asked Freeman. Figured I'd come see if you was doing this legal or just bending to railroad pressure." He opened the book. "This here's territorial law. Says you need a warrant to detain someone. You got one?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I got a telegram." "That ain't a warrant." Keller turned pages. Found what he was looking for. Says here, "No person shall be detained without formal charges filed by a magistrate or presentation of a valid arrest warrant." You got either of those? Dalton's companion stepped forward. "The sheriff has every right to— The sheriff has what the law says he has." Keller interrupted. "Nothing more. And unless you can show me paper that says otherwise, Freeman stays free." The sheriff looked from Keller to Wyatt to the book. His hand left his pistol. "Fine," he said. "But I'm sending that telegram back saying I found Whitman. Whatever comes next is on Boston." He climbed the stairs and left. Dalton's companion lingered. He looked at Wyatt with something like contempt. 2 weeks, he said. Then we'll see if your friends can save you from both the railroad and your past. He followed the sheriff out. Sarah's legs gave way. She sat hard on the bench. Her hands were shaking. Keller closed the law book. "You all right, Freeman?" Wyatt stared at the floor. "Why'd you help me?" "Because my grandson can write his name now. First person in 3 generations who can." Keller tucked the book under his arm. "And because that lawyer Peterson, he came to my ranch yesterday. Said if I supported the school, I might have trouble getting water rights renewed. That ain't how things should work." One of the other ranchers spoke up, a broad man with a sunburned face. "Same here. Got told my freight contracts might not get renewed if I sided against the railroad." He spat. "I don't like being threatened." "None of us do," said a third man. Keller looked at Sarah. "You spoke well tonight. But speaking ain't enough. You need legal standing." He set the law book on the table. "This has the homestead laws. Read it. See if you can make it work." He left with the other men. Their footsteps faded up the stairs. Sarah and Wyatt sat alone in the basement again. "They helped us," Sarah said. "Why?" Wyatt picked up the law book. Opened it. Because Dalton pushed too hard, made it personal instead of business. He found a section marked with a piece of paper. Started reading. Sarah moved closer. Read over his shoulder. The legal language was dense, but there, buried deep, was a clause about educational institutions. Sarah's eyes caught on the words, "Any person who establishes a school serving the general public on unclaimed land may file for title under special provision, provided said school demonstrates regular attendance and community support for a period not less than 30 days. 30 days, Sarah whispered. "We've been teaching for 16. "We need 14 more, Wyatt said. "And we need to prove community support." "How?" Wyatt turned pages, found another section. "Witness statements, signed by community members, attesting to the school's value and regular operation." Sarah looked at him, at the hope starting to show in his face. "The families pulled their children. We only got 4 left. Then we visit every family. Tell them the truth about what we're trying to do. Ask them to sign." Wyatt's hands were steadier now. "Not asking them to send their kids back. Just asking them to witness that the school exists and serves the community." "You think they'll do it?" "I don't know." Wyatt closed the book. "But we gotta try." They rode back to the canyon in the dark. At the house. Sarah lit every lamp they had. Wyatt pulled out paper and started writing. His handwriting was careful, precise, the hand of a trained teacher. "Statement of witness," he wrote at the top. Below, "I hereby attest that Wyatt and Sarah Freeman operate a school in the canyon for the education of children. That said, school has been in regular operation since..." He paused, looked at Sarah. "When did we start?" "June 15th. He wrote the date, continued, "And that my child attended and received instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic." Sarah read over his shoulder. "That's good. Clear." Wyatt made copies, 6 of them. His hand cramped by the 3rd, but he kept writing. When he finished, it was past midnight. They slept a few hours. At first light, they hitched the wagon. "Where first?" Sarah asked. "Mrs. Hoffman," Wyatt said. "She pulled Emma out, but she cried doing it. That means something." The wagon ride to town took 3 hours. The sun was high when they arrived at Mrs. Hoffman's small house behind the hotel. Wyatt knocked. Footsteps inside. The door opened a crack. Mrs. Hoffman's face appeared. Her eyes widened when she saw them. "Mr. Freeman. Mrs. Freeman." She didn't open the door further. "It's late." "I know," Wyatt said. "I'm sorry, but we need to talk to you about the school." "I already told you. We ain't asking you to send Emma back," Sarah interrupted. "We know you can't. But we need something else." Mrs. Hoffman's grip on the door loosened slightly. "What?" Wyatt pulled out the statement. "We're filing a homestead claim, using the school as our improvement. But we need witnesses. People who can say the school exists, and Emma attended." "Just your signature," Sarah added. "That's all. Won't cost you nothing, and won't put your job at risk." Mrs. Hoffman looked at the paper. At Wyatt and Sarah standing on her doorstep in the dark. "If I sign, will it help you keep the school open?" she asked. "Might," Wyatt said. "No guarantees. But it's a start." Mrs. Hoffman opened the door wider. "Come in." They sat at her small table while she read the statement Wyatt had written. Her lips moved as she read. When she finished, she looked up. "Emma asks about the school every day, wants to know when she can go back." Her voice cracked. "I tell her maybe soon, but I don't know if that's true." "It could be," Sarah said. "If enough people help us prove the school matters." Mrs. Hoffman found a pencil, signed her name in careful letters at the bottom of the page. "There, it ain't much, but it's everything," Wyatt said. They visited 6 more families that day and into the night. The Henderson brothers' mother signed. Peter's mother signed. Rachel's mother, still in her hotel maid uniform, signed and added a note in shaky handwriting. "This school is good." 2 families refused. But by midnight, they had 8 signatures. The next morning, they visited Keller. He signed without hesitation and called his neighbors. By noon, they had 12. "Enough?" Sarah asked. "Has to be," Wyatt said. They spent the afternoon preparing documents. Sarah copied the attendance records in her best handwriting. Names, dates, lessons taught. Wyatt organized the witness statements. A traveling photographer had taken a tintype of the schoolroom 2 weeks ago, 6 children visible on the benches. Wyatt wrapped it careful in cloth. The next day, they rode to town again. But this time, they weren't alone. At the edge of the settlement, wagons waited. Keller sat on his mule. Behind him, the families who'd signed. Mrs. Hoffman held Emma's hand. The Hendersons stood with their sons, 12 families in their Sunday clothes on a Tuesday morning. "What's this?" Wyatt asked. "Community support." Keller said, "Figure the land office clerk will think twice about refusing a claim when he sees how many folks back it." Sarah's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. They walked together to the land office, a small building with a false front and a hand-painted sign. Wyatt led the way. Sarah walked beside him. Behind them, the families followed in silence. The clerk, a thin man named Peterson with ink-stained fingers and green eye shades, looked up from his desk when the door opened. His eyes widened when he saw the people filing in. "Can I help you?" he asked. Wyatt set the papers on the desk. "Come to file a homestead claim. Canyon property where I've been living 12 years. Filing under the Educational Improvement Clause." Peterson picked up the papers, started reading. His eyebrows rose. Says here your name is Whitman, but you've been going by Freeman. That's right. Why the change? Wyatt's jaw tightened. Personal reasons, nothing illegal. Peterson kept reading. He looked at the witness signatures, at the tintype, at the crowd filling his small office. This is irregular, he said. Educational improvement clause is rarely invoked. I'll need to check precedent. He pulled thick books from a shelf and started paging through them. The room was silent, except for the rustle of paper. Minutes passed. The crowd waited. Finally, Peterson looked up. Clause is valid. 30 days of operation with community support. He looked at the dates on the witness statements. You're at 16 days. We'll reach 30, Wyatt said. And if you don't, then you can tear up the claim. Peterson considered this. He looked at the crowd again, at the families with children, at Keller standing solid as stone. All right, he said. I'll file it provisional. You reach 30 days with proof of continued attendance. The claim becomes permanent. He stamped the papers, pressed them into a ledger, heated wax, and pressed the official seal. There, official as of today. Sarah's knees went weak. She gripped the edge of the desk. The families erupted in quiet celebration. Handshakes, backslaps. Mrs. Hoffman hugged Emma and cried. Then the door opened. Dalton walked in with his lawyer. They both stopped when they saw the crowd. What's this? Dalton asked. Peterson held up the stamped claim. Mr. Whitman, formerly Freeman, has filed a legal homestead claim under educational improvement provisions. It's been accepted. Dalton's face darkened. On what grounds? The grounds clearly outlined in territorial law. Peterson's voice was steady. The school has community support, documented attendance, and meets all requirements for provisional approval. This is outrageous, Dalton's lawyer said. The railroad has every right. The railroad has the rights the law gives them. Peterson interrupted. Nothing more. And the law says a legitimate homestead claim takes precedence over speculative development. He looked at Dalton. You want to challenge it? Take it to a judge. But until then, this land belongs to Wyatt Whitman. Dalton stared at the claim, at Wyatt, at the crowd of people standing witness. This isn't over, he said quietly. Maybe not, Keller said. But it ain't going the way you planned. Neither. Dalton turned and left. His lawyer followed. The families filed out slowly. Each stopped to shake Wyatt's hand, to thank him, to promise their children would return to school. When they were finally alone. Sarah and Wyatt stood in the empty land office. Peterson handed Wyatt a copy of the filed claim. You got 14 days to prove this school is real. Don't waste them. Outside, the sun was high and bright. Wyatt held the claim in his hands like it might disappear. We did it, Sarah said. But Wyatt was staring past her, at a rider approaching from the East Trail. The man wore a marshal's badge. He pulled his horse to a stop in front of the land office and dismounted. I'm looking for Wyatt Whitman, he said. Got orders from Boston? The marshal was young, maybe 30, with dust on his coat from hard riding. He held papers in his left hand. His right stayed near the pistol on his hip. That's me, Wyatt said. His voice was steady. The marshal unfolded the papers, started reading. Wyatt Whitman. Request for interview regarding... He stopped, looked up, This is 12 years old. Yes, sir. And it ain't orders for arrest. It's a request for questioning. The marshal folded the papers. From a school board that don't exist no more. Says here they dissolved 8 years back. Financial troubles. Wyatt blinked. What? School closed. Board members scattered. The marshal tucked the papers in his coat. I rode 3 days to deliver dead paperwork. Whole thing should have been cleared up years ago. He mounted his horse. You're free to go. Ain't no charges. Ain't even a board to question you. He rode off. Wyatt stood motionless. The claim paper crumpled in his grip. Sarah touched his arm. It's over. 12 years, Wyatt whispered. I ran for 12 years from nothing. Not nothing. You kept the books. You kept yourself ready for this. Even when you didn't know it was coming. That night, they barely slept. The next morning, children waited on the porch. Sarah counted them twice. 15. Emma stood at the front with a jar of wildflowers columbine and Indian paintbrush in creek water. The Henderson brothers flanked her. Behind them, children Sarah recognized, and some she didn't. Some barefoot. Some in clothes too small or too large. All of them waiting. Wyatt opened the door. Come in, he said. They filed inside. Filled the benches. Their voices rose in chaos until Wyatt raised his hand. The room quieted. Welcome back, he said. Today we continue where we left off. Letters become words. Words become sentences. By summer's end, you'll read stories on your own. He picked up chalk. But first, the rules. 1, you respect each other. 2, you respect the books. 3, you try your best, even when it's hard. Can you do that? 15 heads nodded. Sarah watched Wyatt draw the letter M on the board. Watched him kneel beside the smallest children to guide their hands. Watched him become the teacher he'd been before Boston broke him. Emma brought her wildflowers to Sarah's desk at noon. Set the tin can down without speaking. Just smiled and returned to her bench. Sarah touched the jar. Simple. Perfect. The days fell into rhythm. Sarah taught morning's alphabet. Simple words, the mechanics of reading. Her bandaged palms grew calloused as she gripped chalk day after day. Wyatt taught afternoon's numbers, stories, the world beyond the canyon. In the evenings, they planned lessons, argued about books, debated grouping methods. Age, Sarah insisted. Ability, Wyatt countered. They compromised. Mixed groups, older students helping younger, the fast readers pulling up the slow. By the end of June, attendance reached 22 children. Parents arrived early to watch through windows, started asking questions. Some wanted to learn too. Can adults come? Mrs. Hoffman asked one evening. Wyatt looked at Sarah. Sarah nodded. Wednesday evenings, Wyatt said, after supper. 8 adults came the first Wednesday, 12 the second. By July, they had more adults than children. Keller's sons built outdoor benches under the cottonwood tree, long benches seating 6. Set them in a semicircle facing the creek. For warm weather, Keller explained. Sarah ran her hand along the smooth wood. Thank you. The first Saturday in August. Wyatt announced a recognition ceremony. 6 children had completed the primer: Emma, Thomas, William, a girl named Grace, two others, Samuel and Ruth. They'll show what they learned. Wyatt explained to gathering families. Recite, read passages, display their copybook work. Sarah helped the children prepare. They practiced until words came smooth. Copied their best handwriting into fresh books. Saturday afternoon, 30 people gathered in the clearing. Families spread quilts on grass, brought food, cornbread and beans, and dried apple pie and choke cherry jam. Set it all out on planks laid across sawhorses. Keller bowed his head before they began. Lord, we thank you for this food and these children, for teachers who care, for this place of learning. Amen. The crowd echoed, Amen. The 6 children stood in a line facing everyone. Emma went first. I learned my letters, she said. Her voice was clear now, stronger. A through Z. I can write my name. I can read this. She opened a primer to a marked page. The dog ran fast. The cat sat still. The sun set low. The moon rose high. The crowd clapped. Mrs. Hoffman wiped her eyes. Thomas read next. Then William. Then Grace. Samuel. Ruth. Each one reading. Each one showing copybook pages covered in careful letters. When they finished, Wyatt stood. These children came not knowing how to write their own names. Now they can read. They can figure. They can learn anything they set their minds to. He looked at the families. Thank you for trusting us with them. The crowd was silent. Then Keller stood and started clapping. Others joined. The sound filled the canyon. Families ate together as the sun moved west. Children played tag and marbles and hoops while adults talked. Sarah moved among them, listening. My daughter asks questions now, one mother said. About everything. My son's teaching his little brother, a father added. Didn't ask him to, just started. Sarah found Wyatt sitting alone under the cottonwood, watching children play. She sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. You did this, she said. We did this. The children's laughter carried on the evening air. The cottonwood leaves rustled. The creek murmured its endless song. By 7 o'clock, families started leaving. Gathered children and quilts and empty dishes. Each stopped to thank Wyatt and Sarah. Mrs. Hoffman was last. She held Emma's hand and looked at the house at the lit windows and books visible on shelves inside. I can't never repay you, she said. Don't need to, Wyatt replied. Just keep sending her. I will. Long as you'll teach her. When everyone had gone, Sarah and Wyatt sat on the porch. The sun touched the canyon rim. The sky turned from blue to purple to indigo. You think it'll last? Sarah asked. The school, all of it. Wyatt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I spent 12 years alone, kept these books but didn't know what to do with them, kept waiting but couldn't name what for. He looked at her. The ring on her finger, still too large, still sliding loose, caught the last light. You saw it. The thing I forgot was there. You kept it alive, Sarah said. I just helped it grow. A nighthawk swooped low over the clearing. Inside the house, lamplight glowed steady. The books stood on their shelves, waiting for Monday morning when children would return. Sarah thought about the 3 women who'd fled this house, about what they'd seen: empty rooms and isolation and desperate loneliness. They'd been right to run. The house had been a tomb. But now children's voices echoed in these rooms. Books moved from shelves to hands to minds. Parents came asking questions. The community gathered here. The house wasn't a tomb anymore. "We should go in," Wyatt said. "Getting cold." But neither moved. They sat watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The creek sound rose as other noises faded. Somewhere up canyon, an owl called. Sarah looked at the man beside her, at his weathered face and calloused hands, and the steadiness that had grown in him over these weeks. He wasn't the broken teacher who'd fled Boston. Wasn't the isolated man who'd hidden in this canyon for 12 years. He was something new. Something built from old pieces made whole. Inside. The lamp flame wavered. Shadows danced across walls that had been empty and scarred. Now they held children's drawings, copybook pages with careful letters, a slate board with tomorrow's lesson already written. The canyon walls rose dark against stars, the same walls that had seemed like a prison when Sarah first arrived. Now they felt protective, a shelter, a place to build something that would last. "Come on," Sarah said finally. She stood and held out her hand. Wyatt took it, let her pull him to his feet. They went inside together. Sarah lit the second lamp while Wyatt banked the stove for morning. The routine of it felt good, solid. Through the window, the clearing lay empty and peaceful. The outdoor benches gleamed pale in starlight. The cottonwood's leaves whispered. Tomorrow, children would return. The week after, more might come. By fall, they'd need another room. By next summer, maybe they'd have enough students to hire a second teacher, but that was tomorrow. Tonight, the house was quiet. The books rested on their shelves, and two people who'd been strangers 10 weeks ago moved around each other with the ease of long practice. Sarah caught Wyatt's eye across the room. He smiled, not the guarded expression she'd first seen, but something open and real. She smiled back. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The creek sang. The canyon held them safe. And in the house that had once known only silence, lamplight burned steady in multiple windows, now one in the main room, one in the book room, one in the first classroom where tomorrow's primers waited on the bench. The books were visible through the glass. Hundreds of them. No longer gathering dust, but living again in the hands of children who would carry their words into the future. Summer stars emerged one by one in the vast Montana sky. The air smelled of pine and creek water and the faint scent of chalk dust that never quite left the rooms anymore. Sarah stood at the window looking out. Wyatt came to stand beside her. Not touching. Just near. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For staying. For seeing what I couldn't." Sarah didn't answer with words. Some things didn't need them. They stood together in the lamplight. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. Who'd built something from nothing but books, and faith, and stubborn hope. The house was no longer empty, no longer silent, no longer waiting. It was alive. And it was home. There's something quiet that settles in after a story like this. Something tender about watching two broken people find each other in a canyon that everyone else had fled. The weight of Wyatt's 12 years alone. Sarah seeing what others couldn't see, not just books, but a man waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. It sits heavy, doesn't it? That feeling of being the one who stayed when staying seemed foolish. Many of us know what it's like to carry shame for years over something that wasn't entirely ours to carry, to hide from a past that kept following, or to look at emptiness and see possibility when everyone else saw only ruin. Some of us have been the person who stayed. Some of us have been the one building something slow and quiet, while the world rushed past promising easier, faster, more. We know the ache of hope that feels fragile, of trusting in books and benches and children's voices when there are no guarantees. And maybe the ending doesn't feel completely finished. The railroad is still out there. Dalton hasn't given up. The 30 days aren't complete yet. That's all right. Real things rarely tie up neat. Sometimes a story just shows us what we already knew, but had forgotten that staying matters, that seeing someone truly matters, that building something solid takes time and calloused hands and faith that feels thin some mornings. Thank you for sitting with this, for staying all the way through.